Hi, this is a compilation video of all previous episodes of Last DOS games, talking about last commercial DOS releases for particular genres. So, if you've seen those as they were coming out, there's no new content for you here. But if you haven't, then sit tight, grab a drink and a snack, and let me take you on an adventure. Clash is an obscure Polish turn-based fantasy strategy, conceptually inspired by the likes of Heroes of Might and Magic and Warlords. And I have to say that it's one of the most innovative takes on the formula I've seen on DOS, and definitely worth a look. It works on a very finely tuned and well thought out snowball mechanics, meaning that you'll need to fulfill certain sets of consecutive requirements to get your wealth and army power snowball to victory. But getting there will take a while, and we'll cover it in a minute. Or two, cause I'm not sure how long it will take me, to be honest. I'm known for easily drifting off the main subject of conversation into something else, exactly how I'm doing here now. So let's start at the beginning. In the beginning, there was chaos. Chaos in Fantasyland of Karkan, that is. And you playing as one of the king of provinces of Karkan must take over the entire land by defeating the opposing factions and fending off the wild tribes invading it. Which does not sound like an especially huge challenge until you realize that you start with a small castle and a few men only. Hardly an army worth the entire country. So, as in most games in a genre, you start by gathering wealth, and in this particular case, seeking treasures. Like literally seeking them out and then sending your builders to dig them out. It's hardly a sustainable source of income, even if helpful initially, and especially because digging can unearth some nasty surprises too. Like plagues or curses, so taxes is what you'll mainly be using to keep your kingdom afloat. And keeping those taxes smartly balanced, high enough to bring in decent change but not too high to have your citizens leave you, is a key to success. So, you've managed to save up decent money, went to Vegas or fantasy equivalent of Vegas and lost some, and still have a decent spare change left. What can it be spent on, you may wonder? Well, there are things, you know. There's quite a lot of them actually. You can invest it in different kinds of buildings in your castle, which in turn will allow you to recruit different units. You can erect a hospital that heals your wounded, and even school that will let you earn experience. You can naturally spend money to draft armies, which funny enough is not very expensive in itself, but takes a long while for enough men to gather up to form it. And initially you have to pay the quote-unquote licensing fee for a particular type of units to be available. That's not all though, as believe it or not, but you have a wife, and she's a beauty, but also a meanie. So she's not the type to agree to look any less presentable than all the other ladies out there. I mean, wearing the same dress twice is a sin. Every young dame knows that. So you'll need to shower her with money too, to keep her content and happy. Or content and willing, but you know, potato, french fries, spot, whatever. Buying her jewelry, horses, hiring personal cooks or servants, there's a lot really. But it's not all without a reason, as more or less every fifth gift that you give her, she gives you a child. Well, she gives birth to your child, but you know what I mean. Let's not split hair here. Especially that split ends cost money and you're already nearing your budget limit. These kids can be assigned to particular armies to lead them and give them passive bonuses, while personally not taking an active part in combat encounters. And while their help is unquestionably important, if they happen to lose in a battle, the enemy will capture and imprison them. You may be able to save them, but they can be tortured in the meantime or even hanged. So the risk is quite high there too. There are over 30 different kinds of units in the game, and each of them is described by stats of attack, defense, experience, speed at which is formed, and cost. An interesting and rarely seen in similar games mechanic of Clash is the tiredness level. All of your units get tired when marching or fighting, and when the level's too high, it's worth to give them a moment to recuperate, as pushing them too hard may cause them to desert from the armies, leaving you defenseless. It's not something I've seen in many games back then, especially turn-based ones, but definitely a welcome addition, as it applies to both your and enemy armies. So playing smart rather than fast may be a better choice. If you think that's all and there's nothing else that could surprise you in Clash, you're mistaken, because there's a lot. When you get to the point when you have a decent army already, a solid chunk of the world map uncovered, well built up castle and some cash and builders to spare, it will be a time to start our snowball rolling. You'll begin with acquiring new castles, either with forts or by building your own, so yeah, you don't have to be a dick to everyone around you straight away, and you can build a few of your own before you start taking theirs too. And while it takes a long while for one to be completed, and it's usually a first target for the enemy armies, when you finally do, moving gold and men to it is a breeze. And the trick here lies in the number. The more castles you have, the higher your tech level is, which allows you to purchase licenses for better units and intake more gold from taxes. So having many castles, full treasury and a happy wife that will provide you with many offsprings is how you win the game. I realized that I've not mentioned battles yet, and they're crucial in a game like Clash. They naturally happen whenever two armies meet or one of them is storming a castle or other defended location, and they take place on separate battle screens, same as in Heroes of Might and Magic. These screens are considerably bigger than in a more well-known classic, however, and also scroll. So there is an added element of extra tactics in combat, being able to split your armies and attack from few flanks, if the map allows for that naturally. All in all, I stand by what I said initially, so Clash is an interesting and often overlooked game that would have gotten much more attention if it released a few years earlier, cause as the very last DOS turn-based strategy, it's too little too late. After barely escaping the evil Tomato, a ruler of all things tomato in the universe, our three heroes came back home and carried on living their Viking lives as if nothing had ever happened. And you gotta kinda get that, cause back then an average lifespan was around 30-40 years tops, and whomever crossed a 40 mark was instantly touted an elder that knew more than the rest of the entire village combined. I mean, when we had no antibiotics then, and most diseases were cured with either balms made of piss mud and some random leaves, or sometimes ritualistic dances on drugs, a rusty nail sticking out of a plank somewhere was as dangerous to one's life as an army of enemies. Maybe more, cause you can actually run away from the enemy army. Anyway, they were all home, having the time of their lives, raiding, killing and setting enemy villages aflame or whatever the else Vikings do, never missing dinner. Well, for that matter, breakfast either, but lunch was something that could be skipped during those long sea escapades. Until one day Tomato came back, appearing seemingly out of nowhere and sending his robotic guard to capture our trio and send them to the arena. Fortunately, his battery failed or whatever, perhaps Windows Vista failed to update and he stopped in his tracks. So being as crafty as they are, our trio dismantled him into pieces and wear those as their armors now, each of the pieces granting them new abilities. If the story ended here though, we would have no game to play, so naturally something else must have happened, and it did. All three Vikings have been mysteriously transported through time again, and once more have to fight their way through the unknown lands to get back home. Lost Vikings 2 North by Northwest is a much less known game than its predecessor was, at least on PC, so that we're clear that I'm not talking about consoles, as it performed quite well there actually. For the most part, same as the original, Lost Vikings 2 is a puzzle platformer, and identically to its predecessor, our protagonists have to get home, pushing relentlessly through dozens of enemies filled, puzzle-locked of platforming stages, utilizing their skills to solve the levels and progress further. This time, however, Eric the Swift, Olaf the Stout and Balog the Fierce are joined by two new heroes, Sofang the Werewolf and Scourge the Dragon. Odd additions, but whatever, such is the case of sequels made by different developers. 3 out of 5 of these are predetermined for each stage and are chosen in a way that would require all of their skills to contribute to solving all the puzzles included. To complete a level you need to find and collect 3 required items and deliver all your Vikings, well, and/or creatures to the exit. If any of the characters dies, the level is unwinnable and will require a restart. That said, you have to do it manually, as the game allows you to keep going even if you can't complete the level anymore, so that you could familiarize yourself with the layouts, puzzles and better prepare for the second attempt. Or third, or fourth, or fifth, cause you know, some of these can really punish you if you don't know them by heart. Generally speaking, the levels are nearly as well designed as in the original and are easily as tough if not tougher too. So if you're someone who's fast to quit, it may not necessarily be a game for you. On the flip side, figuring out those more complicated stages feels really rewarding, so if not for anything else, it can be worth persevering just for that. And now, I'll tell you what I don't like about the game, as believe it or not, there is one thing actually, and it's graphics. I feel that first outing's pixel presentation aged way better than pre-rendered Donkey Kong Country looks of the second. Some like it, I don't, today that is, but wasn't a big fan of it back then either. Final Impact is a vertically scrolling shoot-em-up and a truly unexpected game to be the last release in the genre for DOS. Especially that I've never played it myself. To this day that is, cause now I have. If you played any of the DOS classics like Tyrian or Raptor, you'll feel right at home in Final Impact. Well, with a small conceptually but rather large gameplay-wise difference, in Final Impact you can actually shoot in the same way you would in Swift, so in all 8 directions and not just upwards. I mean, that requires you having an appropriate weapon, one that has a turret mode built in, but it's there in the game and it's usable. So when you have it, Final Impact feels different than most other games in the genre. Since we're on the weapons, there's over 30 different ones, stronger, weaker, spread, narrow, explosive, homing, you name it. There's a lot, and they're all fun to find, learn how to use, and master. They can be picked up same as in most games in the genre, or purchased between the missions for money earned while playing. You can carry more than one at a time, and switch between them at will, but each of 3 available ships have the weight limit, which has to be kept in mind. The game is composed out of 11 unique levels that are rather nice looking and sporting a very impressive parallax scrolling, which would be considered jaw-dropping 5-6 years earlier, but in 1998, even if decent, it was outdated at best. Sounds and music are fine and fit all the on-screen action, but they're nothing out of ordinary and don't stand out from the genre standard. The difficulty? Well, the difficulty is arcade perfect, even if Final Impact never actually graced the arcades. And what I mean by that is that the game is rather demanding, and the default control scheme does not help with that challenge either. At all, in fact, and I would recommend reconfiguring the keyboard controls as soon as you start the game, as what's included by default is not great. I mean, what you're looking at is me failing time after time at it and not being able to go through a single stage, regardless which of them I've picked. I mean, I know I've not played it before, but how can one just keep failing like that all the freaking time? How? Never mind. If you're better than me, then it's a pretty fun shoot 'em up, last commercial release on DOS, and a title definitely worth checking out. Oh, and I nearly forgot, of course it has a story too. But it's your typical mumbo-jumbo about the alliance of hostile aliens, here named Exaras, conquering the so-called core sector of space, sector where naturally Earth is located, and you having to lead the Final Impact squadron against them to regain the freedom of humanity. Nothing deep, but plenty enough motivation to justify all the shooting. Also, not many people know this, but I too was once a Final Impact squadron pilot until I took a blaster shot to the knee. Earth 2140 is a Polish post-apocalyptic themed futuristic real-time strategy, and a pretty decent last DOS RTS effort at that. If you like those, that is. I don't, so you know, I'll try to stay as objective as I manage to, but may not be overly excited when talking about it. So, believe it or not, but in the year 2140, Earth is in ruin. On a side note, going by what's currently happening in the world, I deem it to be a very plausible future. It was partly caused by numerous environmental catastrophes, partly because of the countless wars we've waged over the years, though with my personal predictions of the end I would probably want to shave off 80 to 100 years of that very optimistic estimate in the game's title. The reason, however, for Earth being the way it is in the game is irrelevant really. Point is, it is a shadow, a shell of its former self, and the remaining humans gathered up, joined into 2 major factions and moved underground, where it was still safe to live. So, you could say that all the humans are mole people in 2140. Anyway, all that remains are the United Civilized States and Eurasian Dynasty factions, both fighting for whatever the scraps of remaining usable land there still is. Earth 2140 features 2 campaigns, one for each side, and you'll be pleasantly surprised with the variety of missions that they offer. Cause while the general formula of mining resources, erecting structures, then building units and sending them to battle will still apply here, some missions have very creative and, dare I say it, fun objectives. There's over 30 of these missions, each site has around 10 types of buildings and 30 kinds of units. They're all different and unique to their side. Oh, and some of the units are huge mechs, which are always fun to see in action regardless of the type of the genre of the game in question. In late game, many of the units can be disabled with use of ion technology and then converted to your site with a special repair vehicle, which, while perhaps unnecessary, is a fun addition. Interestingly enough, Earth 2140 brings some interesting changes to the standard RTS formula. And while you can queue units for production, you cannot recover credits when you cancel the recruitment and cancel buildings either. So those that you have no use for just stand there alone and abandoned, reminding you of how wasteful humanity really is. Additionally, all buildings apart from the construction center, which is self-sustainable, require power to work. So your base building efforts make you equalize the power plant's outputs with power usage needs for everything to run smoothly. What Earth 2140 was best known for, however, other than the graphics, which I'll get to in a moment, is the difficulty. And it's astronomical. I mean, not only because the game is rather fast and doesn't wait for sleepy or neurotic gamers to catch up, but also because of AI being pretty smart. They will often attack you from few flanks at once or try to pull you into a trap, and it's honestly not unusual to be as pleasantly surprised by their tactical choice as terrified of how well they're pulling it off. Presentation-wise, Earth 2140 is, or was, fantastic. The units are clearly distinguishable, uniquely looking and behaving, all very nicely and smoothly animated, regardless if they're moving, attacking or idling. The shots and explosions are well telegraphed too, and it's not uncommon to have parts of the screen entirely covered in fire and smoke during some of those larger combat encounters. Sounds are as good, with all weapons and units having their own high-quality clickety-clackety sounds and explosions sounding appropriately bassy. If you like RTSs, this one's definitely not to skip. Gates of Skaldal is the last fully commercial traditional RPG released on DOS, and it's an obscure Czech dungeon crawler that originally released in Czech only, severely limiting its exposure to the international audiences. Fortunately, it was made freeware in 2007, opening its source code to the public, which resulted in numerous fan translations to English. Today, it can be found in playable form online or enjoyed on Android and iOS, as ports to the mobile platforms have been released too. The game is set on an ancient island of Rovenland, island that's magically enchanted by the gods that rested there for a while after they created the world eons earlier. Now, what gods do for R&R is hard to tell, but it must have been something nasty, as there's magic goo everywhere and the island emanates with magical aura all throughout it. When the game begins, however, centuries later, things are not well. 5 evil mages residing on the island joined powers, breaking the Ghostbusters and public urinals law of so-called preventable stream crossing, and work their way towards opening of the gate to forbidden dimension of Zohar. And in Zohar, all kinds of nasty reside. Demons, monsters, undead, my boss's wife, vampires, you name it. Everything that's nefarious and evil is there and waiting to be released. The mages hide within the Seldar Tower, that they filled with monsters to defend it from those who might want to prevent them from succeeding. Since there's no one powerful enough to stop them, elderly scholar and former archmage Fregiar summons 3 heroes as the last means of preventing the catastrophe. But as he does just that, he underestimates the strain it will take on him and dies in the process. The 3 heroes are later joined by another 3 to form a full-fledged party of badasses and last chance of humanity to try to stop the evil casters from potentially destroying the world. Pretty cool start to an even cooler game, don't you think? The 3 heroes are obviously the characters that you create initially and can come in 4 different classes of fighter, wizard, thief and ranger. You can however create interesting dual classes mixes by moving the class alignment dot over the octogram split in all 4 during character creation. The choice influences the number of attribute points you'll have to split between the 4 main stats of strength, magic, agility and dexterity. And while initially a mixed class character may not be as good as one of the fully committed to one craft is, their shared proficiencies may come in handy later on. Secondary statistics like weapon skills, defense or experience cannot be set up in character creation but will change during gameplay. As most good dungeon crawlers, Gates of Skaldal features a decent mix of combat and puzzling, and for purposes of both your party can actually be split. All because some of the puzzles may require interacting with objects and levers in different places at the same time, and also because surrounding the enemy during combat and beating them to a pulp from all sides like some kind of a medieval fantasy goons may yield much more favorable results. Now, I'm not saying that you'll be dividing your party constantly or often even, but it's worth to keep in mind that you can. Especially when you find yourself in a situation in which you won't know why you can't solve a particular puzzle while seemingly doing everything right or facing challenging enemies. Combat is turn-based and good, cause I'm sick and tired of fighting with the interfaces or control schemes of games as much as I do with the enemies, and having time to carefully plan out my strategies is something I actually enjoy. It's a bit of a double-edged sword though, as encounters are rather long, so if you don't appreciate games in which a single combat can take minutes, Gates of Skaldal may not be something down your alley. There's a whole land of Rovenland to get through before you even set foot near Skaldal, and it's split into smaller interactive sections between which you have to travel, so it's not an entirely open world experience. Towns that you'll find and visit are quite fun too and filled with NPCs. With some of them you'll even be able to trade and haggle, and the locations generally speaking don't feel empty and devoid of life as some of those found in earlier dungeon crawlers did. While sounds and music are rather decent, it's the graphics that are the star of the show here. And while they're not on the same level as in the biggest RPGs of 1998, especially those released on Windows, they're rather nice, detailed and fun. Yes, fun is the right word. As apart from detailed backgrounds, the enemies are often funky and weird looking, which in my books is always a plus. To summarize, Gates of Skaldal is a very good last effort for DOS and a game worth experiencing even today. Or especially today, cause you'll actually understand what and why you're doing. Pył, aka Dust, is a Polish sci-fi first-person shooter. The year is 2798 and we've been colonizing space for centuries. We're here, we're there, we're everywhere. But as we spread more and more, we also spread our culture and way of life. And if you think TV, movies, music, books and paintings, then you're dead wrong. That's what we consume, but our culture, it seems, is based on something entirely different. Veni vidi, conflict. I came, I saw, I sure as hell wanna take it for myself and make sure others get none. And while individual humans can be great, loving, understanding and respectful, whenever we gather up in groups something bad happens and all our worst traits and tendencies seem to surface. So, conflict is what we took with us. But since there's no place for it in prospering and ever-growing empire, it was decided that all disagreements between the factions, nations or organized groups should be solved by means of armed combat on a far-off moon, aptly named the Arena, serving as Empire's peacekeeping program, and whomever refused participation faced total relentless annihilation. Peace through terror has its way of keeping people in line, I suppose. Anyway, as the years progressed and conflicts rose and then were solved on the moon's surface in a bloody combat no less, it eventually turned into a destroyed battleground covered in wrecks and technology of yore, and one that's full of mercenaries, smugglers, thieves and murderers, all seeking powerful or expensive gear and artifacts left behind the numerous wars. You find yourself coincidentally stranded on the Arena and must now scrap for artifacts to sell them to survive, all the while seeking Valkyria, an interstellar ship that is said to be there somewhere, still operational and your only means of escape. Armed with just an assault rifle, razor-sharp jaw, impeccable hairline and a will to live, you must venture through 17 levels fighting off different bodies, conserving the ammo where you can and seeking other, better weapons, all to get to the Valkyria and leave the planet. Given the number of enemies, how scarce the ammunition is and the difficulty, Dust is much more of a tactical sneaking shooter than an all-out guns blazing one, which is a nice change of pace for the genre, even if overall it feels very rushed. It's hard to put the finger to the exact things that could use extra time, so I suppose it's a combination of gameplay, presentation and design, and all would benefit from a little more lore. Overall, it's not a bad game, but not great one either, and if it was released in English, it could have perhaps gained a bit more traction back then. But it only ever came out in Polish, and it took a while for it to get a translation, so when it eventually did, it was already too little too late to save it. As it stands now, Dust is an interesting last game in an iconic genre on an iconic platform, and even for that alone, it's worth remembering. Wrecking Crew is one or two player kart racer. And yes, I am aware that there are no karts in it, but please, let me explain. Imagine Mario Kart with all that it entails, so cartoon-like vehicles, funky and Nintendo-centric cast of cute characters, and tons upon tons of pickups to find and use to beat your opponents on the way to the finish line. You're still with me? Great. I never doubted the power of your imagination. So, let's start replacing things until we land on the Wrecking Crew. First to drop are the characters and their cars. So all the Princess Peaches, Marios, Goobas, Luigis and the whole Nintendo shebang have to go bye-bye. Instead, we get a cast of weird, bizarre and odd characters in that particular order. A two-headed Siamese twins joined by a single body, Frankenstein out of spare body parts creature from nightmares, old woman with a severe case of arthritis, circus animal trainer / tamer, a random Rasta and many more. Alright. Since we're done with that, let's swap away pickups and power-ups now. While many are similar to those found in Mario Kart, even if different named and looking, few are entirely unique to the Wrecking Crew. I mean stars for instance. They better your handling, especially on those sharp corners. Repair fixes damage done to your vehicle, teleport instantly moves you ahead on the track, time stop holds your opponents for a few seconds, X2 doubles the damage dealt with your weapons, and keys, when all four are collected, they unlock access to secret hidden 5th racing cup. And since I've mentioned weapons already, you can fire left, right, backwards and with specials in all directions. So learning how to best utilize those and which to use when, and also how all power-ups work is a key for success. There are 4 unique track teams in the game: Sydney, New York, Amusement Park and Mediterranean Sea region, and they're all nicely detailed and fun to zoom around on. Wrecking Crew is not the easiest of games when you play it first and may require you to invest a little time to learn it. But as soon as you do and start noticing shortcuts, secret routes and hidden areas, you'll begin winning and eventually will master all of the tracks and conquer numerous cups. Wrecking Crew is an incredibly fun title if you're a fan of the whole crazy arcade karting experience, and especially if you have a friend with you to race against. And while alone it's a fun game for a few races, when played against someone, it can no doubt provide hours of fun. There are two areas Wrecking Crew could improve in though. First would be full real online multiplayer with more than just two players racing against each other. As well, it's fun the way it is, just imagine how much more it would be if all cars were driven by real people. And second is the rubber banding, which I hate with the passion of competitive sausage eater. So angrily and with a permanent craving for more. Wins. More wins, obviously. When I'm ahead, I wanna stay ahead, and when I'm behind, I wanna fight for the position. Difficulty slider is always a better choice than rubber banding. Wrecking Crew is a unique and fun take on kart racing, and while I've seen and played better, it's fun for what it is, and also a last commercial DOS arcade racer, so if you enjoy this, don't sleep on it. Jonah Lomu Rugby is the last commercial sports game ever to release on DOS. It's also a team sport and rugby, so you know, two things I know literally nothing about. You know how in school, whenever you were playing some team sports against each other at PE, you were always dividing into two teams and team captains then picked their players one by one. Yeah, I was nearly always one of the last few picked. Not because I was out of shape, it's because I was totally indifferent to sports and put no heart in them, so naturally no one believed I could do well. Fair assumption, I suppose, so I just stood there and participated only when I absolutely had to and had no other choice, and did the bare minimum. Oh, to be clear, I'm talking football here, so soccer. If there was no ball anywhere near me, I would not move an inch and just stand there lost in my thoughts, staring with my empty bird-like eyes into depths of nothingness, which as I recall now must have looked weird, but whatever, I didn't care back then, not gonna start now. And if you don't know what I mean, just look any bird in their eyes, they're empty and yet look as if they were looking right through you, straight into the very fabric of reality. Scary stuff. That said, eventually at some point in one of those games one day I was relegated to be a goalkeeper, and despite me being rather short, it turned out I was pretty good at that, with my cat-like reflexes and all. And from that day onward, I was not last or second to last to be picked, but fourth or fifth from the end. Which, you know, was a huge step up, but also meant that I saw much more action, and I didn't appreciate it at all, as it was eating away my private thinking time. Anyway, back to our game, which I've still said nothing about. Well, all that intro was to highlight that I know as much about team sports as I do about interstellar travel, so very little. And I've not played it, so everything I'll tell you about it will be what I read and/or saw online. Jonah Lomu Rugby puts you in control of real rugby union team from the 1995 Rugby World Cup. There are 32 teams to choose from, 16 finalists of the year and 16 that did not pass qualifying campaign. All teams and players included are naturally licensed, and the game is more of an arcade take on the sport than the simulation. There are 4 gameplay modes available: Friendly, World Cup, Tournament, Territories Cup and Classic matches, and as I list them now I realize that it's actually 5, but whatever. And while the first 3 are pretty obvious, the last 2 aren't. So, Territories Cup is basically a league play based on a particular geographic location, and allow for a choice of 5 nations, Tri-Nations, American Cup, Asian Cup or Pacific Cup. These last 3 featuring 3 teams each from their neck of the woods, so to speak. The Classic Matches mode consists of 8 scenarios based on real-life historical World Cup games, which you can join in progress to try to change their outcomes. While rugby may not be the most popular of sports, everyone knows that the title for that goes to competitive apple eating, it still received rather good scores from the professionals and gamers seemed to like it too. So, if you're someone who cares about rugby, this one's a good one. The Last Express is a real-time point-and-click adventure set in 1914, just before the outbreak of the World War. You play as American Dr. Robert Cath, who receives an invitation from a friend to join him on the Orient Express. Without giving it second thought, you accept and get on the train, and with style no less. And I mean it, you're literally jumping on it from your motorcycle, escaping the authorities as a suspect in a murder you did not commit. The story is naturally grossly simplified here for the sake of the video, but that's more or less how it went. If that all wasn't enough trouble already, and your life wasn't plenty action-packed, when you finally get on the train, you find the dead body of that friend of yours. Yes, the one that invited you. So, to escape the suspicion of 2 murders now, you decide to disguise yourself as the dead man, and all that is just the beginning of a roller coaster of treachery, lies, political conspiracies, personal interest, romance and murder, all aboard the titular train. I nearly said Orient Express here. I nearly did. Anyway, Even though The Last Express was not a commercial success upon its release, it gained highly positive reviews from both gamers and industry professionals alike, not in small part thanks to its non-linear story and real-time gameplay. While majority of the game is experienced from the first-person perspective, all of the cutscenes are in third-person view and are stylized like some of these very early and jumping between the frames animated movies of yore. The time keeps running constantly in The Last Express and in real time, albeit multiplied by a factor of 6. Many of the events in the game are scripted and run on a schedule too, so you have to keep track of the in-game clock and their on-train locations to be able to witness them as they take place. The game features over 30 individual unique characters, all with their own artificial intelligence and agendas, so when talking to them you have to always keep in mind that they're after their personal goals first and anything else later. So, unless you intervene and change what particular person was about to do, either by having them do something else by changing their mind or just talking to them when they were planning on doing that thing, they will follow their own schedules. And each and seemingly small change in these may have a lasting impact on the rest of the game. This branching design approach made The Last Express a really addictive title, the one that also ended up with over 800 pages long script for. There's 30 quote-unquote bad endings, 4 alternate neutral ones, and a one that's considered a true ending. The game may have not been a commercial success, but it's definitely worth not only your attention, but also a playthrough. Jet Fighter Full Burn, the last combat simulation to release on DOS, was a title that dropped during a very transformational period, between the dusk of DOS and dawn of Windows gaming. And as such, it was always on the outskirts of gamers' minds, never reaching the popularity of some other games in the genre. I mean, there are other factors that could contribute to that, but I'm betting on the release date and platform choice to be the main culprit here. Still, it's an interesting light flight combat simulation depicting fictional conflict between NATO and Russia. Norwegian oilfields seem to be the igniting factor in it all, and soon enough the disagreements evolve into a full-fledged war that's as ridiculous and out of place as most of the omnipresent FMV sequences are. It's okay though, story is not very important in a sim, as long as the gameplay is fine, and it is. Fine that is. Full Burn follows a very linear campaign, built out of carefully crafted pre-made missions that can be experienced from both sides of the conflict. Either FA-18 and F-22N on the NATO side, or MiG-42 on the Russian. Some would consider pre-made missions with no option to generate them randomly or dynamic campaign an omission and a mistake in game design, but you have to remember that Full Burn was never made to rival hardcore flight simulations, and its light approach to the realism, physics and flight dynamics coupled with oh so many cheesy FMVs made it very approachable but also cringe as hell, to the point that the video sequences reach that magical spot in which they're so bad that they're ironically good and worth experiencing. Especially that it's clear that the devs wanted the game to be the next Top Gun so much. Oh, so much. Like more than you and I wanna win the lottery. And they just failed at everything that it would allow it to reach that elusive level. Well, everything but gameplay, cause think what you want, but I believe that for what it is, if you ignore it not being very realistic, Full Burn's loop can be pretty fun in its simplicity, flying in that sweet spot in which I'm feeling comfortable and not overwhelmed by hundreds of dials, switches and multi-key keyboard controls. Presentation-wise, Jet Fighter Full Burn using earlier Jet Fighter 3's engine is pretty terrible. The engine is clearly not up to task and a rapidly aging tech that was rather old even when used with its original game. Still, if you're like me and not getting overhyped about hundreds of keys needed to control the craft and love terribly acted videos in games, then Full Burn may actually be something to spend a little time in. Would I recommend seeing it through to the end? Not really, but I'm not gonna lie. Cheese is what grabbed my interest, and having to play through dozens of hours of missions just to see it all is a bit much even for me. Soldier Boys is a terrible, awful, appalling and horrendous game, based on HBO's movie of the same title and loosely following its plot. Not as bad as Pro Soccer 2190 on Amiga, but you know, that one was one in a million trash. Soldier Boys with a Z is also the last FMV-based game to release on DOS. And it's such a second-rate product in fact that some of the professionals reviewing it at the time failed to land on the number higher than 0 in its score. So you can imagine what we're having a pleasure to witness here today. Also, I don't think it's 0 bad, I mean it's definitely atrocious but it's working and from a mechanical point of view it's playable too, so at least a 1 or 2 out of 10 is a valid score if you ask me. Anyway, Soldier Boys' gameplay is an adaptation of the movie and an on-rail shooter which took some creative and notable changes in certain spots, diverging from the source material's plot, but its end goal remained pretty much the same. Vietnamese terrorist Vinh Moc shot down the United Nations plane flying over Vietnam and from the wreck of it kidnapped Gabrielle Prescott, daughter of an American billionaire. Why was the daughter of a billionaire on the UN plane? Hard to tell, I've not seen the movie, but clearly it was not something that escaped Ving, and he planned for it, took his chances and scored big. The rest of the plot resolves kinda like one of those weaker A-Team episodes, so Prescott, the billionaire, and I've no idea why I keep mentioning it, seeks out and hires Major Howard Tolliver, an ex-marine and a badass extraordinaire, to assemble a team of daring and highly trained vigilantes and find and rescue his daughter. The only difference here being that Tolliver does not have a band of merry plane-fearing outlaws on call, and he needs to recruit them from life sentence-serving inmates from the prison he works in, which he does, somehow ignoring how the entire prison system works. So, they're the game's budget version of DC's Suicide Squad, devoid of looks, character, personality, superpowers and semi-decent plot to follow. And they all land in the heart of Vietnamese jungle, ready for anything. From this point onward, armed with your trusty mouse cursor, limitless patience and resistance to cringe galore, you take control and you'll need to traverse through dense Vietnamese jungle, seeking out Gabrielle and killing hundreds of bad guys who just happen to reside in the forest behind every second tree or bush. The story is composed out of dozens of separate video clips playing one after another, and when each is running, you'll need to decide in a split second whether you wanna go all out and shoot everything moving that you see or ask questions. And as the saying goes, shoot first and ask questions later. There's no better game than Soldier Boys to prove it correct, trust me. I mean, sure, you miss on a bit of a background info or plot hints when going for the innocents, but you're not penalized in any other way and the clips are rather cringe, so you know, is it really a lose or are you just winning faster? One way or another, however you approach the game, be it slow or sonic fast, it will still take only 40 minutes to an hour at most to complete it. And it's not going to be very satisfying, on the contrary, I think you'll feel even more empty after going through it than you did before. It's just so stupid and mindless, and not in a funny way. In essence, it's shooting for the sake of shooting, and you never really feel that there's any reason behind it, despite it being pretty clearly explained and based on a rather bad movie. The presentation is, well, I should really end it just like that and say the presentation is a bit cheeky, but also on point. Still, I'm not gonna, and as you can clearly see, the quality of the video footage is very low. It's grainy, lacks definition and color, and runs a bit choppy. Sounds are not much better either. Play it or not, it's the last FMV game we've got on DOS, and good, cause clearly we needed no more. Mortal Kombat Trilogy is my third most favorite 2D Mortal Kombat after first and second respectively, and the only one other than the first that I really enjoyed completing. Anyway, since we're on the subject of the trilogy and not any other, it's obviously a 2D versus fighting game combining characters from the first three titles for an Ultimate Fighter matchup of the 90s. And you can play as literally any of the characters that we saw in previous games. So Kano, Sub-Zero, Scorpion, Liu Kang, Johnny Cage, Raiden, Sonya, Reptile, Baraka, Jax, Kitana, Mylina, Kang Lao, Shang Tsung, Sindel, Sector, Striker, Nightwolf, Shiva, Smoke Rain, Jade, Ermac, second Liu Kang, because why the hell not, one's definitely not enough, Noob Saibot, second, this time unmasked and less lore-friendly Sub-Zero, and I always imagined him sporting a mustache under the mask, which he clearly does not have. Cyrax, second Smoke, in Cyber Ninja form, whatever that may mean, maybe hip implants as he's rather old, who knows. Cabal, Goro, Kintaro, Motaro, Bolo Yang and Shao Kahn. And only one of these last four former bosses is not in the game. Can you guess which one? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. He may have been a unit in his own right, but he's definitely not present in the series in any shape or form. Each of the 32 included characters have their moves, fatalities and looks sourced from their own games, and they play as well as they did originally. Backgrounds are also a combination of old and new, and are as fantastic as the cast of fighters is. Objectively speaking, the trilogy is the very best 2D iteration in a way too long-running by now series. Personally, I love the first game the most, but I'm biased towards it, and this bias is fueled with gallons of nostalgia and familiarity and nothing else. If I was to metaphorically stand aside and compare them all, Trilogy was easily the best, at least when it comes to variety, features and responsiveness of controls. One thing that it fails at least in my opinion, and sadly that's also a very important thing for me personally, is the atmosphere. I just feel nothing when playing Trilogy. As compared to the first two titles that not only gave me shivers with their very climatic musical tunes and respective title screens, but also set the mood with their intros. In first, with the story and genesis of the tournament described on a Goro-themed background, and then short clips of all fighters playing out their moments of glory. And in second, much simpler, with the starry sky and slowly starting thunderstorm, cutting through it with lightning and leaving Roman numeral 2 in it, in dark blood red coloring. They were both short and not sophisticated in any meaning of the word, but epic feeling to my young self nonetheless, if that even makes sense. If I was to go off my memory only, I could not tell you anything at all about Trilogy's startup/title screen or the accompanying tune. I've literally no idea how it starts or sounds. All that aside, personal feelings especially, Mortal Kombat Trilogy is a really competent, fun and bucketfuls of blood-spilling fighter that will no doubt keep you and your friends entertained and competing for weeks on end. Or will end those friendships over disagreements who'll get to play as Sub-Zero or Scorpion first. Both options are equally as feasible. Burnout Championship Drag Racing has nothing to do with more popular and well-known Criterion Games' Burnout series that premiered 3 years later in 2001. It's a drag racing simulation, and for the time it released in, pretty good one at that. Well, the only one too, but that's beside the point. And it's all about racing on short linear tracks, optimizing your car's performance and polishing your driving skills to become the fastest racer out there. Out where? There. On one of the games included 20 real-life drag racing tracks, recreated as faithfully as the tech in 1998 allowed for. Burnout's gameplay is split in two, the preparation stage and the racing stage. In first, you choose one of the 20 available chassis and customize everything that goes in and around it. The engine, transmission, wing, tires, suspension and many more. Truly making the car your own, or breaking it in the process if you're me and have no idea what you're doing. That's possible too. The number of options and components here is just breathtaking, and all types of grease monkeys and tinkering enthusiasts will find it as, if not more fulfilling than the racing itself, creating their fast and ultimate road beasts. Is it easy to make a car that would be the speed monster in Burnout? If you're not versed with drag racing physics, it will take a while, and a little trial and error too. But ultimately, when you get a hang of it, it will feel really rewarding. Other than your speedster's inner configuration, there's a lot to consider while racing. Weather, track's altitude and lane attributes, all of these play an important role in how you should drive. And racing itself, well, it too naturally follows the rules of the sport to the letter and is based on a very strict and precise regimen. First, you have to burn out a few times to warm up your tires, then inch to the staging area, from where after getting a green light, you'll zoom away pressing the pedal to the metal while trying to maintain a straight line halt on your car. It's easier said than done, but surprisingly fun if you learn how. Well, more fun to those who are into the whole drag sport, rather than those who just look for the bog standard arcade racing. Also these, who love to dig deep, seeking ways to shave off that fraction of a second, changing seemingly unimportant things like exhaust manifold or valve diameters, they love it too. I mean, I have no idea what these two are, and I don't mean in English, I mean overall, in my own language either. Exhaust manifold sounds like a very strong constipation medicine that you could only get with a prescription, and valve diameters like something you'd do when having issues performing in bed. It would probably be better explained when used in a sentence, I feel. So let me try. Oh man, Julie, I'm so sorry. I swear it had never happened before. I really don't know what happened here. Please, just give me a minute. I'll quickly use the washroom and adjust my valve diameter so we could try again, okay? Does it make sense now, guys? To me neither. Anyway, so yeah, this Burnout is not for me. On a side note, whenever I hear drag racing, I really don't think of the official sport, but more like the illegal street races, you know, those we've seen in Fast and Furious. Fast and what? Well, family cars, family, respect, family cars, family Dominic Toretto, family, then even more cars, maybe a bit of tuning and some guns, more family, even more family after that, and to round it all up, family. That Fast and Furious. So, I appreciate this Burnout for what it is and what it aimed to do, largely succeeding I must add, and find it to be a very respectable last commercial racing simulation for those, even if it's not a game for me at all. XCOM Apocalypse is a third game in the original XCOM series and a direct follow-up to The Terror from the Deep. It's also a game that turned the entire franchise upside down, and my second most favorite DOS game of 1997, trailing behind Fallout only. At its start, Apocalypse assumes that after the last war with alien invaders, things have not gone well for the humans. We've won, but barely. Those that survived live in a huge self-sufficient city of Mega Primus. The civilization took a while to rebuild, and as soon as everything appeared to be finally changing for the better, strange portals started showing up in the sky over the city. And surprise surprise, it's aliens again, and this time they've even more of a threat than ever before. So, XCOM is needed once again to save the day and humanity at the same time. The main core of the series is sustained in the apocalypse, meaning that research, development, base micro and macro management, tactical squad-based combat during missions and ship-to-ship air combat respectively are all preserved. A bit changed, sure, but still present in the game and easy to grasp for whomever played the earlier titles. As usual, you will also have to carefully manage your budget, as you're nearly never going to be in a situation where you have too much cash lying around gathering dust. And soldiers, vehicles and scientists all have to be recruited and equipped. To the teeth, no less. Now, let's get into what's different, and there's a lot of it. For starters, beautiful detailed SVGA graphics replaced older, lower style-based 2D engine, and this new presentation allowed for much more to be seen at once, making those longer missions easier to manage without having to constantly scroll through huge combat maps. And since we're on the subject, combat can be either turn-based or real-time. It's clear that the game was designed with this new real-time approach in mind, but even turn-based lovers such as myself will quickly learn to adapt and either use it or stick to tried and tested turns. I did. Played it in turns, that is, and didn't feel as if I was missing anything or being handicapped because of that. There are many more interesting maps in Apocalypse to fight with aliens now too, so you'll be tackling outworldly threats in slums, corporate buildings and their headquarters, glass-encased farms, factories, apartment buildings and in wreckages of downed UFOs to name a few. Most weapons, upgrades and vehicles are entirely new as well, and a pleasure to manufacture and then use against the invaders. Many of the aliens are also different, new versions of all the Xenos. And some of them are really imaginative and clearly inspired by the Alien franchise of movies, which fits the game's theme quite well. The city of Mega Primus, while theoretically being just a location that the game is set in, feels alive. It's run by numerous mega corporations that are constantly at odds with each other, and it's them that you have to protect to secure the funding for progress. And nearly every step of the way, interests of these groups will clash somehow and directly oppose one another, so you'll need to make a lot of difficult choices along the campaign. Because it's impossible to please everyone, and the sooner you realize it, the better. And if you anger one of the corpus enough, it may not only become your enemy and engage you in combat, but even join the alien side. Caution and careful planning in XCOM should really be applied to any and all, big or small decisions and day-to-day occurrences in the city. If you hire scientists or purchase something, anything, all these have to be delivered to your base, and don't just magically appear in it. So transports, as they're on their way, are susceptible to ambushes and attacks and have to be protected. Well, at least if you know that you're at odds with someone or aliens are around. As much as Apocalypse never received as wide popularity and success as the two earlier games did, it was an amazing, even if underrated title, and all fans of the originals, if they only give it a chance, will most definitely love it. It's a true sequel and not an add-on or a reskin that the Terror from the Deep to a certain degree was. But most of all, it's a good time, for weeks on end. I promise. Well no, scratch that. Good time if you're good enough to answer the call, that is. Cause failing in XCOM is always an option too. 1999 Snoot is the last commercial puzzle game to release on DOS and a late port of 1996, macOS's original clone of a more well-known puzzle bauble. And conceptually, it's nearly one-to-one remake of it. With a difference that instead of colored marbles, in Snoot you shoot at the geometrically shaped faces. I mean, shoot faces into faces to be clear, there's no violence in this one. So, gameplay-wise, all is as you expect it to be. You're in control of a slingshot at the bottom of the screen and you shoot different-looking faces upwards, where others are aligned in various patterns. The aim of the game is to complete a stage by clearing it of all of the suspended at the top faces. And you do it by matching them. When 3 or more of the same kind make contact, they are removed. You can remove more with one shot too if they're attached to those that you're clearing at any given moment and not touching ceiling or the other faces. So naturally, the strategy here is to remove as many as possible in the shortest time. It's worth to mention that any shot that fails to remove at least a basic 3 of the screen results with a line of the faces dropping by 1 level. So, all misses contribute to your potential future failure. And I don't have to tell you that the lower the faces get, the more difficult it is to remove them. Especially that some shots may require ricocheting them off the wall to reach the target at the correct angle. If the faces ever manage to cross clearly indicated bottom play area border, it's game over. As you play like some kind of a puzzling WizKid, removing faces like a boss, you have to keep an eye on the board, as at some point skulls will appear on it, and these cannot be matched as you have no skulls to shoot with. So the only way of getting rid of them is to remove the blocks that they're attached to. Snood comes with 5 difficulty levels and set of 50 challenge levels, and as puzzle bubble clones go, it's not bad, but also incredibly annoying to me. Why, you may wonder? Well, believe it or not, it's not the simplistic graphics and sounds that don't look or sound like something that belonged in 1996, let alone 1999. Nope, I'm actually fine with that. I play indies and retro games, I can understand someone not having budget or skills to pull something nicer off, but what grinds my gears in this one, and is annoying as hell too, is that all of the faces have all of the geometrical shapes you could think of, and yet they bounce off walls as if they were all perfectly round. And while it's probably not an issue to anyone but myself, it just does not compute in my programming and makes me question reality. Cause I mean, not only they should rotate, especially when hitting the walls, but they shouldn't fit in all the little gaps between the other faces so easily, given their different shapes. I know, I'm not what you'd define as normal, even though we should not really use these kinds of definitions in 2024, but it is what it is, I am what I am, and I can't enjoy Snood the way it is, despite it being a very fine port indeed. So, I think you will have to try it out and make up your own mind about it. Young Si Pao Pao Long, or Brave Bubble Dragon, is basically a modern clone of Bubble Bobble. So, it took everything that Bubble Bobble did, raised it to the late 90s quality level in terms of both graphics and sound, and extended on the gameplay formula a little too. But the changes are so minimal that any players of the original can just jump straight in and start playing without noticing any obvious differences in the mechanics. So, the game is starring 2 cute as hell tiny dragons, and they have to battle their way through dozens of single-screen platforming levels, disposing of the enemies with bubbles and collecting food for points along the way. Bubbles are naturally used to trap the enemies within, and then can be popped to explode those enemies into non-existence and drop tasty and healthy fruit behind. Come to think of it, it means that all of the cute creatures that you'll be popping left and right like a maniac with a needle in a balloon factory are just ironically healthy piñatas. Healthy as in that they drop fruit instead of candy. Who would have thought such a thing was even possible? I mean, everyone knows that all the piñatas living in the world drop candy when popped, and these somehow don't. Well, game logic, I suppose. But I fear that it may be messing with the kids' heads, putting weird ideas in them, trying to teach them that the piñatas are built different than how the nature made them. I mean, what's next? Are we soon going to learn that the tooth fairy is not real? Come on, everyone knows that it is, and it lives in the same kingdom as piñatas do. Oh well, I suppose educational systems aren't as good as they used to be. I'm exaggerating a little, not all piñatas in the game are fake, and some drop sweets too, but there's a few of them, and that's hella troubling. Anyway, other than just popping the enemies, bubbles can be used for traversal too. Our tiny dragons can jump on them happily and be lifted upwards to places otherwise unreachable, meaning that the bubbles can be used for platforming as much as for the escape from the baddies. So far it sounds just like another Bubble Bobble game, right? And for the most part, it actually is. Which, you know, is great, cause Bubble Bobble was easily one of the best single-screen platformers ever made, but there are some small differences. One of them being keeping the groups of stages bundled together into thematic worlds, with each of the worlds having their own unique design and creatures. There are also bonus stages within the game and small changes to the gameplay mechanics. They're fun and fresh, but don't change the game too much so that it would feel like something else. So stuff like teleporting doors, for instance. Small change, big fun. Oh, and bosses. Yup, there are bosses too, and they're pretty cool to battle against, and all require a very specific and fun to figure out mechanic to beat. They're just great. Presentation-wise, other than missing the iconic musical theme of the original, everything is fantastic. The sounds and music are both rather good, high quality and fit into the on-screen action, and the graphics, while 2D, are beautiful, detailed and super smoothly animated. If you enjoyed the original and/or like single-screen platformers, they were hardly any better in 1997. And this one, being the last commercial release on DOS, was phenomenal and an incredible goodbye to the rapidly aging platform. Queen was a cold British rock band that's responsible for many of the biggest hits of the 20th century. Their music mostly touched subjects of bicycles and other manually propelled vehicles, being stressed out and wanting to rock someone, whatever that may mean, most likely to sleep or with series of projectiles thrown at them. They also sang about not wanting to live very long time, definitely not forever, being a champion, either in nondescript sport or of the world, which is even more vague, and also a savior of the universe. You know, fun stuff no one understood then and no one understands to this very day. And that very music was also remixed and used as a soundtrack for Queen DI, the game that we'll talk about today. It's a third-person action-adventure very similar in its design to Resident Evil titles. meaning that the environments are in a large part pre-rendered with some sparse 3D objects, with all the characters in 3D and overlaid on top of them. Oh, and the camera is obviously fixed and swapping its position between the scenes, often erratically when you're at the point where two scenes switch, which is more annoying than having a dinner with someone who smacks their lips constantly while eating. A pet peeve of mine perhaps, but it just gets on my nerves. Anyway, I never enjoyed that approach to the early 3D in video game design, as it was easy for me to get confused, with the camera jumping between different points of view in the same room or location, depending where you walked within it. Annoyances aside, what is this game all about even? The setting of Queen the Eye is rather dark, gloomy and depressing, and something very similar to 2002 movie Equilibrium starring Christian Bale. It's a dystopian future where the world is ruled by all-seeing machine called the Eye, which has eradicated anything and everything, promoting creative expression. So, the order prevails, and the individuality and artistry should not be promoted, not to lure the hungry minds into a trap of free thinking, which is obviously dangerous and toxic to peaceful, established and well-working societies. So the world is blunt, sad and submissive to the evil Eye. You play as Agent Dobrok, an operative cooperating with the Eye, an enemy to the general populace, a traitor, all rolled into one. But in the course of your duties, you accidentally rediscover a cache of old rock music and are promptly detected, blamed for its existence and sentenced to death in the so-called Arena, a live TV show where contestants battle former Arena champions called the Watchers. A cruel irony, if you ask me. Anyway, doesn't this part of the plot remind you of something? It emanates very strong The Running Man vibes for me, which was another old and underrated sci-fi flick, this time with Arnold Schwarzenegger though. Whatever. This is where the game starts, and from this point onward you take upon yourself to escape the arena and destroy the Eye, as you finally saw it for what it really was. Interestingly enough, many elements present in the game were later on adapted into the musical We Will Rock You, so if you've seen it, you should recognize some story bits here and there. I've never had a chance to see it, or any other live musical for that matter, so don't take my word for it. It's a curiosity I found about the game online. Gameplay features a lot of exploration and combat, hand-to-hand and melee, so if you like that in games with claustrophobically small room and corridor designs, you'll enjoy it here too. Queen is not a bad game. It just came a little late, as it was way too long in the development, so upon its release not only it looked a little dated, but also did not play as good as some other competitive titles did. And that's why it's a rather obscure and a little known game. Darklight Conflict is a rather good space combat simulation, and one that offers a very believable space physics, which I felt was worth mentioning here, as it's not a given even in games in the genre today. The game's story is pretty stupid. I mean, more stupid than most plots are in FMV games, which are known to be notoriously bad in that regard. That's really fine though, as after the first few minutes you'll stop caring about it, focusing on fighting your way through this action-packed chunk of space, destroying what feels like entire planets worth of alien ships. So, you're the human. Yes, not a human, but the human. That's how they call you in the game at least, and you're Space Navy pilot, captured by the alien race of Reptons and genetically modified to serve as their pilot drone in a war with another aliens, known only as Ovons. Now, why would a superior to us technologically advanced alien race need to abduct someone to pilot their crafts? It's hard to tell. The game suggests that they've no skill in that whatsoever, but then again, you see them later on chasing you in their ships in the story, so, you know, like I said, the plot is dumb. What we do know though, and what I have no doubts about, is that you're the deadliest pilot this side of the game's local sun. Or star. It's a star and not the sun, sun is the name of our star, whatever. In Darklight Conflict, you'll be piloting one of 3 different Repton crafts, occasionally captured enemy ship, and in some missions, you'll be in a turret on a huge-ass mothership, pewing maniacally at the enemies coming at you in dangerously high numbers. It may not be the widest selection of crafts, but they're all uniquely filling and fun to fly around in, and variety of missions you'll partake in more than makes up for a limited selection of ships. So, you'll naturally take part in numerous skirmishes against bigger and smaller fleets of enemies, you'll defend Repton motherships, or attack those belonging to Ovons. You'll clear the asteroid fields or even seek out and retrieve objects using tractor beam among others. And all of them will be hella fun if you're someone who's into space combat, which, I have to say here, is really well made. The aforementioned physics are spot on and influencing everything, from how your ship behaves to the inertia of shipwrecks or debris after explosions, moving within the confines of the simulation and reacting to one another when they collide. It's a beauty. So you zoom around this beautifully detailed, realistic feeling space, disposing of countless enemies, completing over 50 varied missions, and, well, having fun. Because despite a little inflated difficulty level and an army worth of alien ships to dispose of, when you get into Darklight Conflict, get used to its gameplay loop, it's addicting as hell, on par with combating games like X-Wing or Wing Commander. So, you could say that it's very similar to the two classics in terms of combat, while serving a very superficial and plainly put stupid plot. There's one area other than the plot that Darklight Conflict could improve in, and that's controls. Because the default scheme is not most user-friendly and not all of the controls can be changed, so you'll need to get used to it to break through its initial barrier of annoyance, so to speak. Realms of the Haunting is a mixture of a survival horror adventure and first-person shooter. It's an unusual concoction, but one that surprisingly works pretty well and is the last game in its subgenre to release commercially on DOS. It uses improved version of Normality's engine and serves a very deep and well thought out occult adventure, using heaps upon heaps of full motion videos spread over 4 game CDs. While you're experiencing the game world through the first person viewpoint, there's a free floating mouse hand on the screen at all times, and it's used to interact with objects in the game. So you'll be leaving your greasy paw prints everywhere, touching anything and everything, investigating the locales that you'll visit. Puzzles that you'll be solving are generally speaking logical and not based on trial and error, but beware, cause quite often you'll be pixel hunting for that one particular object or a place to click on that may be hidden away somewhere, difficult to spot, but required to progress further. Like I said, you'll touch a lot of it, to the point of it being borderline a fetish. It's not a game-breaking issue, not an issue at all actually, just the way that the game was designed. But definitely something worth mentioning so that you know what to expect. Story-wise, Realms of the Haunting starts off as a typical haunted house story in which you play as Adam Randall, a son of a deceased priest who ventures into his late father's seemingly haunted estate to investigate the mysterious circumstances of his death. Soon enough, however, in fact as soon as you enter, the doors creepily shut behind you, leaving you with no means of escape and a mystery to solve. Mystery that will eventually evolve into full-on end-of-the-world occult-based drama. As the game progresses, you'll meet a psychic, Miss Rebecca Trevisart, who will offer her guidance as you'll both work towards leaving the cursed house. House that turns out to be an old satanic temple filled with both demons and evil spirits. Also, and that's a side note only, quite modern drinkable spirits in form of various finely aged bottles of whiskey. Yummy! And unwashed dishes and dirty laundry too. But that is one thing you're not there to sort out. You will learn, however, that the person who sent you to your late father's home is actually a 500 years old sorcerer who's bent on a world destruction, and also that you're the so-called chosen one, like Neo in The Matrix, but less flashy and with no leather duster or sunglasses. All in all, as survival horrors go, and especially those played from the first-person perspective and released in the 90s, there was hardly anything better, and Realms of the Haunting, with its over 40 hours long adventure, is worth every minute spent at it. Pro Pinball Big Race USA is the third game in the Pro Pinball series of 3D games, and a much improved simulation at that too. There's a lot of inner table mechanics that you can configure now, same as you would on a real table. So stuff like flipper strength or table angle to name a few. The physics engine has been improved considerably too, and best of all that the Big Race USA includes in terms of mechanics is made in a way that would make it possible to be recreated on a real life table. So purists of the genre would definitely enjoy this one since it didn't use any impossible elements. There's even a difficulty slider this time, and that's a pretty important but Big Race USA is rather difficult regardless of what level you choose. I mean, it's not impossible to enjoy because it's fantastic, but it really demands that you give it your best, and even if you will, it will still keep you on your toes. Which, you know, for some may be a problem, but for fans of the quote-unquote real thing, it's exactly what they were hoping for in a pinball simulation. Because yes, unlike many of the games in the genre, I would actually not consider Big Race USA a pinball game, but a pinball simulation. A product so close to life, so deeply configurable and well put together that it took many years for other games to come close. And yeah, while I love my pinballs, I'm not great at them. So personally, I tend to lean towards those more arcade-centric games, but true pinball fanatics will absolutely love this one, I've no doubt about that. Now, as the title and footage you're watching may have given away already, Big Race USA comes with one table only, and it follows a crazy perhaps, but perfectly realized in a pinball form idea of being a taxi driver and traveling across the US, picking passengers along the way. It's filled with various minigames and submissions, both on the table and dot matrix display, So you may be trying to grab a bonus bonanza performing U-turns, you'll go for the switches in the mall mayhem, and drive a cab train to wreck as many cars as possible in the Dot Matrix minigame too. And these are just a few of numerous fun bits and pieces Big Race USA is built out of that will keep you engaged for hours on end. And even more than that, if you have someone to play against. Because same as with most other games, pinballs too are best appreciated with others when a little competition gets mixed into gameplay itself. Simply put, Pro Pinball's presentation is outstanding. At the time of its release, the game had no real competition when it comes to the quality of graphics, and the only thing it could really be measured against were the real-life tables. That's how great it looked. Sounds are quite excellent too, and all the bumpers, switches, even the table surface when the ball moves over it sound like the real deal, and make the whole package feel extremely realistic. And that brings us to the fun factor, which, you know, is not always in pair with the presentation. We've seen hundreds of examples of great looking and sounding turds, and opposed to that, super fun playing titles built out of ancient graphical elements with PC speaker sounds. So, I'm happy to report that Big Race USA does not fail here either, and is as addicting as the real thing. Perhaps more, as you don't have to keep dropping coins to play. So yeah, that's worth keeping in mind. I wish you knew how difficult it was to find the last hack-and-slash game for DOS. I mean, the genre officially spawned into existence with the release of first Diablo on Windows in 1997, when DOS gaming was on its last legs, and hardly anyone thought about making new games for it. Sure, we could in theory talk about games like Ultima 8 Pagan, which combat was a bit hack-and-slashy, but other than that it was a full-fledged RPG, so it would be a bit of disservice to it to add it to such a specific subgenre. There's also Dark Seraphim, a game from 1997, but in all honesty, that one's more of a beat and bump rather than hack and slash, as you're bumping your character into the enemies. So, finding one that would fit the genre before it even existed was not easy and took some time. I found two, Tower of Souls and Trial by Magic, both released in 1995, and while the first one is objectively a better game, it released in the first half of the year and was more focused on puzzling than combat. Trial and Magic fits the bill better, and released later, but it's rather bad. And yes, we're gonna talk about the bad one today. The story here is rather brief and simple. The elusive and mysterious Trial Master challenges you to go through and survive his dungeon. Many have tried before, some were much more buff, steroid-fueled warriors than you could ever be, and yet all failed. But if you manage to complete the entire 20 plus levels of the dungeon and live, he will award you a nice and round 50,000 gold coins, pure gold coins no less. And if you account for inflation, that's more or less a 1/10 of Jeff Bezos' worth, so a lot. Imagine how many dungeons he had to go through over the years. Anyway, Trial by Magic is an isometric hack-and-slash RPG that's very similar to the earlier classic, The Summoning, but focusing much more on combat. So you'll be plowing through the levels, killing countless different enemies, all the while collecting precious, my precious, loot and improving your character for the challenges ahead. You can naturally use both standard weapons and magic. And while melee weapons need no explanation, you just put them into the air and wave them like you just don't care. It's worth to keep in mind that arrows are a finite resource if you ever wield the bow, so it's not one of those games where you can just magically shoot when you get it. Nope, you also have to have something to shoot with. I often shoot with cringe comments and bad jokes, but they rarely hit the target, just like this didn't. Anyway, magic uses runes. These have to be found and combined, which is a bit troublesome in its own right, as they're usually well hidden. But at the very least, when you finally get them, mana replenishes quite fast, so you can cast without worrying about it too much. Other than the terrifying monsters, priceless loot and treasures, there are traps in the dungeon too, and these have to be avoided. Or better yet, if you only manage to, used against the enemies chasing you. I say so because Trial Magic is a rather difficult game, and having a way to cause extra damage to the buddies without engaging them directly is super helpful and a good practice in the long run. There are no NPCs in the game, no shops, no inns and no story progression. So all you really have to do is survive growing through the dungeon, and that will be enough to get a rather disappointing ending and the aforementioned 50,000 gold. Well, and satisfaction of beating a pretty demanding game, so yeah, that's pretty much it. Presentation. Sounds and graphics are... yep, that's what I have to say, they are. Well, I could add that games in 1992 looked and sounded better, but that would just be mean on my part. True, but mean. Anyway, if you wanna see how the last one of the very few overall DOS hack and slash games looked like, make sure to check it out. But don't get your hopes up. I think it's pretty obvious by now that all the best and little known DOS beat'em ups came from Korea, and even if not all, then most. What's more, they were usually mixing interesting additional mechanics to stay fresh all throughout and provide more compelling gameplay than their arcade or western counterparts did. And the Soul is no different. Evil powerful sorcerer slash half-tiger, a were-tiger if you will, is terrorizing the kingdom of Bagje, and your group of 5 brave battle mages vows to deal with him, his possessed armies, and free the kingdom from under his rule, possibly the world. Quite a challenge, but if not you, then who else would be capable of setting things straight? The Soul can be played by 1 or 2 players and features 5 unique characters to pick between, each of them having their own strengths, weaknesses, special and magic attacks. As you go through a whole manner of enemies, human, demonic and otherworldly alike, cutting them down like weeds or leaving bruised, beaten and dead, sometimes all free, you'll also collect so-called level up points, which then can be distributed between the levels into health, strength, intelligence and your hero's 5 different magical skills. It's to give you a sense of progression and that you better your character along the way. The Soul's most unique feature, however, is its non-linearity, meaning that after completing many of the stages, you'll be given a choice of multiple destinations, effectively allowing you to craft your own path through the adventure. And since on each playthrough you're given a random set of stages to pick from, the replayability of this one is quite high, and hardly ever do games play out the same. What's unusual about the Soul in the whole scope of the brawler genre is that you only get 1 life, and that's it, kinda like you do in real life. If you die, or well, actually get killed, that's it, it's game over and you have to start from the first stage. But to counter that and the difficulty, the devs offered something else not seen in the arcades, namely save slots. 4 of them in fact. So, while not perfect, it's a solution. Graphics and sounds are excellent and no wonder as the Soul released in 1998, long after DOS's heyday, so it had to look good to spark any interest in potential buyers. Whether it did overall, it's hard to tell, it definitely didn't in the West, but we were already long on the Windows bandwagon and appreciating the new possibilities that the system offered for gaming. All that said, the Soul is stellar, and if you're in the market for a fun and rarely talked about beat-em-up that features unique take on the genre, it's definitely one to seek out and try out. Oh, and if you're going to play it through DOSBox emulation, make sure to give it plenty power, as when it's too slow, somehow it affects your character more than the enemies, and they move and attack faster than you do, which makes the Soul totally unplayable. Virtual Snooker is a follow-up to year prior's Virtual Pool and easily the most realistic simulation of the sport to ever grace DOS. It also featured young Steve Davis, arguably historically the most famous snooker player. The most important thing about Virtual Snooker, however, is easily its playability, and it's perfect. It, along with its older brother, Pool, were the first simulations of the sport that converted me from the earlier arcade pool and snooker games, as they were finally better than the Amiga classics. The physics engine powering it all is fantastic, and the balls move, bounce off each other and bounce realistically, never leaving you thinking how particular situation on the table may have occurred. Naturally, snooker balls are smaller than those of pool and behave a bit different when zooming around the table, and I believe it may have been accounted for too, because if you compare this and year prior's pool side by side, the way they move is a bit different, especially when they hit each other. It's fun to compare but also irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, and saying that the physics simulation is fantastic should be all that you and myself really need to know. Virtual Snooker's graphics are beautiful and in full 3D, and when I say full, I mean it. You can actually step away from shooting and move around the table to check all the angles, zoom in and out to your heart's content, and plan carefully how to approach a particular shot. It's great. Sounds are fine, though a tad sparse, but that's expected from snooker, it's not overly loud sport after all. I would appreciate some kind of an elevator music in the background to cut through the overwhelming silence though, but we didn't get it, and that's probably the only bad thing to say about the game's presentation. That it forgot about 2-3 tracks that could loop and carry you through the numerous games you'll no doubt be playing. Now, there's one more thing I don't like about it, but it has nothing to do with how Virtual Snooker looks or sounds, and it's single-player games. They suck. No, really, they do, big time. Not only the CPU acts weirdly, often missing close shots and in the same time having no issues with perfecting those far-off difficult ones with ease, but also takes a lot of time to act. I mean, it's not unusual for it to take upwards of a minute for each, and that's just ridiculous. So yeah, I won't recommend Virtual Snooker as a single-player experience, but if you have someone with you willing to give it a go, it'll be hell of a time and you'll both enjoy it. I promise. Dungeon Keeper is an oddity. It's part real-time strategy, part settlement management, part tower defense, short of the towers, and finally, part first-person fantasy combat game. And when all these parts combine, I am Captain Oh my. Wrong video, sorry. Obviously, I meant that with all this combined, what we're left with is amazingly addictive and fun game that's a pleasure to play today as much as it originally was. And kinda, sorta, not really, but also a little yes, Reverse Gauntlet, where you're not the hero going through dense, damp and dark dungeons cutting through countless terrifying and deadly monsters, but the demonic overlord managing said dungeon, hiring all the monsters, making sure that they feel as comfortable or as uncomfortable as they need to fulfill their role of adventurer repellents the best way they can. You're the evil. And boy oh boy, how fun it is not to be good for once. You start each level in the heart of the dungeon room, and quite literally I must add, it's a room and there's a huge ass beating heart in it, and it's the only thing that really matters. Cause that heart is what you have to defend at all cost. When it falls, you die. And when you do, good wins, and we don't want that, do we? I mean, it is, after all, about time that the evil should triumph for once, right? To protect the heart, you'll have to construct and manage the entire dungeon around it. So you recruit and train minions to defend it, you mine for gold and gems, set traps and build rooms, each naturally with its unique purpose and use case scenario, and you can cast spells too. I know that these last few sentences are a lot to take in and process if you've never played the game, but Dungeon Keeper is all that and more. So the heroes periodically invade your dungeon, fighting new creatures, seeking treasures, and ultimately trying to get to that ever-beating dungeon heart. They're not all boring as Knights Eater and can be a whole manner of different folks, like strong and resistant giants, powerful and dangerous wizards, and unexpectedly samurais too. And yes, these are just a few. As you progress through the game, pacifying countless braves, unlocking new rooms and along with them new creatures, you'll keep finding new ways to play, experience, enjoy and progress within the world of Dungeon Keeper and its 20 regions waiting to be conquered. Each of the creatures you build the rooms for is different in both stats and their behavior, and some of them are actually natural enemies to one another, so you should not build rooms willy-nilly just whenever it suits you, but plan ahead for both how the enemies will go through them, and also so that they would not keep creatures that hate each other close by. Spiders and flies, for instance, are quite obviously natural enemies, so keeping them close will never yield good results. Well, at least not for the flies. Another thing worth mentioning here is that at any moment you can take control of any of your creatures and traverse your dungeon exploring it from the first-person perspective. Some would consider it a gimmick, but I think it was a fine and worthy addition. Dungeon Keeper is amazing. It may not look like anything special in this short preview video, but believe me that it's so good that not many games of 1997 could compare to it in terms of playability. Especially that up to 4 dungeon masters could play together via modem or LAN. It's a gem. Since I've already spoke about Soldier Boys in one of the previous videos, I had to pick another game for my pick for the last live-action FMV on-rail shooter, and it's Hardline. And it's not a great game at all. What a start. By 1998, when the game takes place, in Detroit no less, the police, military and government are unable to stop the cult known as the Sect plaguing the city. I would like to applaud the devs for calling the cult Sect, which is just on another level creativity-wise. It's like having a puppy and calling it dog, which coincidentally is what I would have really named my dog if I had one. Or Covid. Covid is a good name for dog too. I'm torn between them. Anyway, the Sect members known as sectoids are particularly nasty bunch, as in their pursuit of chaos they even turn to attacks on civilians, hospitals and schools, which is a dick move, regardless of how big of a one you are anyway. With steadily growing numbers, ease of access to weapons and general public unrest, the cult gains bigger and bigger chunks of the city, and unless some kind of a miracle will stop them, it will soon overtake all of it. You play as Ted Arvin, also known as the Miracle. Well, not really, but that's what you'll be posing as if you manage to make yourself complete the game, and you will have to make yourself if you aim to do it. So Ted is a helicopter pilot who somehow not only knows how to use all kinds of weapons, but is also a master marksman and a badass extraordinaire. What's more, in the course of the game he'll also gain telekinetic powers, which he'll use for instance to open otherwise permanently locked gates. So yeah, game logic. The gameplay is rather simple to explain. A choppy, low-quality video sequence plays out, bodies jump out and you shoot them. If you land a hit, then it's great. If you won't, then it's not bad either, as you'll be shot yourself, and that's one step closer to changing the game. The shooting sections are intertwined with videos of Ted walking or running, or walking and then running. Sometimes he runs and runs some more, and then more again. You get the gist. Oh, and a little dialogues there from time to time too. But if I'm to be honest, all of it looks as if it was made with actors paid for one day of work only, with an intention of recording everything as fast as possible and in one take. So, if something didn't look good, and most things don't, they just run with it anyway. It's, well, bad. That's what it is. What's worse, the game, while theoretically not being very long and maybe 3-4 hours in total, is so random in how it applies the difficulty that you just never know whether the next section will be much easier than everything you've went through so far, or so difficult you'll spend an hour or two on it load save scamming. It's awful. Overall, Hardline feels like someone made a terrible B-movie and decided that it was too bad to be released. But since the footage was still there, the money was spent, they've cut it into 1,000 pieces and made a game around it. An Operation Wolf type of affair, but much worse and fun only for the first 10-15 minutes, maybe less. Which is still much more than can be said about Pro Soccer 2190 on the Amiga, the worst game in existence. Anyway, I kinda sorta see Hardline being enjoyed by those who love bad acting, cause it does have that so bad that it's actually ironically good quality about it, but then again it has its gameplay too, which is subpar at best, so I'm not sure how many of you will be able to go through it all. I know I won't. So, do as you will with that, and play it only if you're an avid fan of on-rail shooters or love atrocious acting more than anything else. Many of the great series had their spin-offs being something entirely different than the mainline games, and very often these were not what fans hoped for and or of lower quality. I mean, Fallout had its tactics, XCOM had its incubation, and Civilization had that console abomination subtitled Revolution, and it was anything but. I'd say that it regressed more than evolved, but whatever, it's a subject for another video. Elder Scrolls had Battlespire, a first-person action RPG. Unlike its bigger brothers of Arena and Daggerfall though, Battlespire was a more contained, less grandiose and entirely linear story. So, imagine any of the aforementioned titles but devoid out of nearly everything that made them great and entirely refocused on combat. Now, does it mean it's a bad game? Nope, it's not. It's just not on the same quality level as the others. It's more akin to classic dungeon crawlers of yore, but played in real time and with free movement, rather than the open-ended role-playing monstrosities that previous entries were. Monstrosities that many of us loved, no less. Battlespire is naturally set in Tamriel and puts you in the shoes of a young battle mage apprentice training in the titular school of Battlespire. On the day of your final test, want to become a full-fledged sword-fighting spellweaver, you discover that the army of Didra, led by the nefarious and known from the first game Mihrunes Dagon, has invaded your school and killed nearly everyone. If that wasn't enough, who they didn't kill, they captured, and one of them was your partner. So now, armed with your unlicensed but still deadly set of skills geared towards destruction and annihilation, and fantastically strong grip on a sword, and an enchanting smile to boot, you have to embark on a quest through various realms of oblivion to find and kill Mihrunes Dagon, saving your partner in the process, and then fight your way back to Tamriel. Interestingly enough, Battlespire was initially supposed to be an expansion for Daggerfall, but something happened along the way, and it was remade to be a standalone title based on action-packed dungeon crawling instead of story-driven RPG. In fact, it's like a set of dungeons torn out of the entire Elder Scrolls experience and minimized to just that. So there are no towns or cities, no shops and no gold at all in Battlespire, and all the items that you get come from loot in combat or items scattered around dungeons. The story is served in dialogues with NPCs only, and each of the 7 included levels offers its own theme and background. So, while simplified, Battlespire may have actually been a very viable mid-step for gamers who were used to traditional dungeon crawling RPGs and did not play those modern, open-world ones before and needed something to ease the transition. What's Battlespire most notable for, however, is the co-op multiplayer, which allowed 2 gamers to complete the entire adventure together or participate in team-based versus mode, where 2 groups of players would use their characters in combat. Sadly, these modes are not supported anymore as they relied on GameSpy software, but it's worth noting that Elder Scrolls Online was not in fact the first Elder Scrolls Online. Excuse me the pun. Still, Battlespire is fine if you take it for what it is and can be a quite enjoyable action RPG romp, but if you expect another Daggerfall out of it, you'll be seriously disappointed. Do you remember kickoff football games? Or soccer, depending where you are geographically? You don't? Well, that leaves me in a bit of a pickle as I have to explain it first. Luckily, I'm nearly as good at explaining things quick as I am at flying, and I mean it both, literally in the air and proverbially flying off the subject when talking about it, just the way I do now. But how can I fly in the air, you may wonder? Well, believe it or not, you can too, and it's rather easy, you just jump up and fly. The fact that I fly for just a fraction of a second and very short distances and that I always land on my feet is irrelevant here. The way I see it, it's flying. So, since it's time to circle back to our game's progenitor, Kickoff is a series of football games that in the early to early mid-90s were very popular and the biggest competitor to sensible soccer games before the 3D boom. And as such, they were loved by gamers all over and had perhaps smaller, but as cult following as sensible soccer games did. And player manager games were football managers made by the same company, Anco, and using Kickoff's engine to simulate all the matches. Which made them as, if not more flashy and modern looking than most other managers at the time. And Player Manager 99 is no different, as it's based on Kickoff 97's engine, the penultimate main game in the series. And while our today's game is not bad, and a pretty decent football management simulation in its own right, even with its 3D match engine, it was not as good as the competition, and henceforth never reached any real acclaim or popularity. The most interesting thing about it though, which was not reproduced by any other game in the genre at the time, at least to my knowledge, is that you could play as the titular player manager. So other than keeping the club running, you would also be an active part of most games. Well, I say active, but what I really mean is that your avatar would be one of the players on the team, one close to retirement age no less, and that the game would simulate all your actions in the field. Still, controlled or not, it's a fun addition, even if largely unnecessary. As in most other games in the genre, there's quite a few tactical options in the Player Manager 99, 8 different formations, and all of thousands of included real-life players are described by 8 invisible attributes and a few hidden ones too, that only the game keeps the record of. Unlike most similar titles though, Player Manager does not rate the footballers, as in it does not assign numerical or star value to them other than their market value that is, which as we know is not a direct one-to-one reflection of one's skill, so when choosing a starting 11 and subs, you'll need to keep an eye on not only the particular positions that the players are versed in playing in, but also their other attributes, like flanking, dribbling and headers to name a few. So while the depth is definitely there, something is missing, and I can't for the life of me tell you what it is, it's just the feeling that I had when I last tried to play its series more or less 2 decades ago that made me come back to my fave at the time Ultimate Soccer Manager 99, and never look back. Perhaps it just didn't land for me as a product, or perhaps it was just because everything, especially the matches, took so goddamn long in it. The point is I never got into it, so can't honestly recommend it. But it was the last sports management game to commercially release on DOS, and that achievement is unquestionable, even if it's only a proof that sticking to the nearly dead platform was not the way to go. Bust a Move Again, aka Bust a Move 2, aka Puzzle Bobble 2, is an arcade marble matching game by Taito, and one with 1,000 names. Nope, scratch that, that's entirely wrong. There are 3 names only, but the clones of it, especially today when mobile platforms are so popular, now these may be in thousands. The basic gameplay mechanics are unchanged from the original, and it's the same little brilliant arcade puzzler that it's ever been. So it's that simple to figure out and get into title that's devilishly difficult to master in the same time, especially on higher difficulty. You're located at the bottom of the screen, the dead center of your board, or in the middle of one of the 2 boards if you play with someone else. And you shoot marbles at the top, where more of them are attached in different pre-assigned hallucinogenic colored patterns. And your goal is as easy as they come, to clear the screen of all the marbles by shooting yours at the ones above. Marbles pop and disappear when 3 or more of the same color touch, and that's pretty much it, the entire philosophy behind it all. And now you know how to play Bust a Move Again. Well done you. I mean, I know that you knew how to play it already. I just needed that little win today to know that I explained it well. Anyway, sad life stories aside, when you miss and fail to form a chain and your marbles touch any other, it connects to it, adding to the ones that need to be removed, increasing the difficulty of the challenge. If at any point marbles fill up the screen, or any of them pass to the bottom borderline, it's game over. And since the ceiling never stops descending, and does so periodically, the difficulty is constantly progressing and keeps you on your toes and glued to the screen level after level, performing seemingly impossible on-the-fly mathematics, calculating all the approach and bounce angles like a snooker pro, while playing something that's 100 times better looking and 1,000 times more action-packed. And yeah, I know what I said, you can challenge that statement, but I do in fact find it to be more fun than billiard, be it snooker or pool. Even if the comparison is apples to oranges or apples to little old and slightly sun-dried grape. Potato, potato, tomato, tomato, carrot, onion leeks. Bust a Move Again is one of the easiest and most user-friendly puzzlers out there, easily hours of pure fun, and a game that millions of players worldwide fell in love with at first sight. Because of its over-the-top cute presentation coupled with cartoony looks, super smooth gameplay and very solid mechanics that proved to be addicting to gamers of all kinds and ages. Oh, and the tournament-styled variation added to it that allowed for playing against CPU or others made it even a better title than it originally was. Not to mention branching mapping single player, keeping it fresh for longer, and the best of it all, level editor, which, while perhaps unnecessary, is still something I praise in every game that includes it, as having those in is a very pro-consumer, nay, pro-gamer friendly move that deserves recognition and respect. Bust a Move Again is one of the most fun and entertaining puzzlers of the mid-90s, and if I'm to be honest, it's still one of these to this very day. Deadline is a tactics game simulating realistically an anti-terrorist unit and its operations. It's viewed from the top-down perspective and plays in real time. You're in charge of a special unit of soldiers and you pit it against various dangers in series of discrete missions covering various tactical scenarios. So you'll be facing fanatical cultists, blindly following their leaders, you'll tackle drug dealers and their armed two-detective goons, you'll chase down and capture escaped prisoners and even try to stop terrorist attacks, among others. In fact, this last will take up a bigger chunk of your game time. In most missions you'll need to save the hostages and try to disarm and capture as many enemies as possible. Full-on guns-blazing approach is neither recommended nor expected if you want to complete the mission successfully. As a matter of fact, it may be impossible even, so smart planning ahead and sticking to your plan is nearly always the right call, kinda like it is in real life. I, for instance, plan to leave Hell as soon as I will be able to abandon my demonic boss and his bazillion times worse wife behind, and it will require time and effort, mainly on my side, with a touch of luck too. But as I am doing my best to leave, you should do your best to prepare and execute a perfect mission in Deadline. Each mission has an extensive background about the enemies you may face, hostages, location and the likes, so you can research everything about the challenge ahead and its conditions before picking your squad and attempting to tackle the problem. So, focusing on all, even the smallest and seemingly insignificant bits of information is a must, as in the end, everything you find there may prove to be immensely helpful later on. On the other hand, you have a set amount of time for it all only, so you have to do it pronto, wasting not a second and splitting time wisely between preparation and mission execution. Not to leave yourself without time to act, or even worse, hostages executed before you even get to the mission site. Each of your soldiers is different, and while none of them are superheroes and better than the others, they all have their respective areas of expertise, which are an important factor to take under consideration when choosing the right squad. Deadline offers ability to communicate with terrorists in a limited manner, either via vidphone or in a negotiation mode. You can cut phones, gas and electricity lines to occupied buildings, and have access to virtually anything that real squad leader in a situation like that would have, which makes for a very fun and movie-like feeling experience. Sadly, upon its release, Deadline wasn't very popular, and it's hard to tell why, as it's not a bad game at all. But such is life, I suppose, and it's one of those mysteries that will forever remain unsolved. Unless you know why and can shed some light on it. Then yeah, by all means, do so in the comments below. If you like tactical games and have some time to burn, Deadline is a decent choice and you'll most likely enjoy it. War. War never changes. And the great nuclear war that wiped most of life off the face of the earth was no different. Brutal, devastating, but also a short one. It took but a day to lay devastation to our world, and what emerged after was a hot, dry and empty wasteland, with only small, remote communities spread over large distances serving as beacons of hope and split with large patches of radioactive wastes full of dangers, raiders and mutated monstrosities of various kinds, like super mutants, which are large, strong, deadly and, well, super. And ghouls, which are small, weak, but also pretty much deadly, and not super at all. And mole rats, neither strong nor deadly, but I've heard of one that could talk. You could say that he was a king of his kingdom. Anyway, you're an inhabitant of one of the vaults, large pre-war bunkers that were supposedly built to hold large chunks of the population safe after the nuclear holocaust. Yours, Vault 13, however, had its water chip broken, a purification controller chip no less, without which the vault has no access to clean water. So, after a long and rather nerve-wracking game of rock paper scissors, which you've clearly not won, you're sent into the wastes to find the replacements and have only 150 days to do so. Initially, as if you play your cards right, you can double it during one of the quest lines. Fallout is a post-apocalyptic RPG set in wasteland of what was once US West Coast. The game world is entirely free to explore from the get-go, and you can go anywhere you'd like. It doesn't mean that you're equipped to deal with what you find there, but you can go wherever you feel like it. The main quest is interesting and will take you through a series of hoops to complete, but it's not overly long. Fallout's depth and length comes from hundreds of side quests, big and small, that are scattered throughout the whole game world and enhance the gameplay experience, making it feel more immersive and characters you meet more real. Fallout features very fun and well-designed turn-based combat system that uses action points as a basis for all of the movement and attacks during encounters. You can attack aiming your shots or swings depending on the weapon at the various body parts of all enemies, and the choice of the target can result in increased accuracy or critical chances. After all, a head is a much more fragile appendix than the arm, at least to blunt force delivered via rapid baseball bat keys to forehead, or a series of consecutive and precisely aimed hits by small but very fast-moving lead-based objects. Naturally, as in life, kick to the groin is an option too, and when all else fails, it is something you should revert to. Note that down. But since we're on a combat, the game is built in a way that allows for completing it without ever actually fighting, by either avoiding and running from encounters, or in the best case scenario, by solving conflicts via conversations, provided your skills would allow for that naturally. Fallout is the first title in my most beloved series of role-playing games, and in my personal opinion, the best game of the entire 1997. So, how did you find this look at the last commercial DOS games ever? Do you think that the games were as good as those released in platform's heyday, or did they fall behind and it was about time for Windows to take over? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below, and maybe share it too, it helps more than you know. If you didn't, then don't naturally. It was fun talking to you as usual, and I'll see you, or more accurately, talk to you very soon.